Okay. Are we on? Yeah? Hello, my name is Modja, and welcome once again to this first video of Polyglot Principles, where I teach you how to learn a language like a genius by following the principles of language learning. Now, language learning is not easy. It's a bit, forgive me a bit, there's noise around. Ferme-moi la porte, s'il vous plaît. Alright. So, language learning is, it can be a very daunting task, you know? You've maybe never learned a language before. There's so many words that you don't know. There's all these sounds that you don't understand. How do you learn the language, right? And you might be thinking that there are all sorts of limitations stopping you, right? So today I'm going to be talking about the 5 myths of language learning, right? These may be things that you believe to be true and that are actually stopping you from learning the language when in fact they are not true. So let's look at the 5 most frequent language learning myths out there, right? You might have some of them. The first one is that I'm too old to learn, right? So there's this idea, I don't know where the heck it came from. The idea is that to learn a language, the ideal age to learn a language is when you're a kid. When you're 5, 6, 7, around there, you can learn. And there's even this idea that if you go beyond 12 years, after 12 years, it's not possible. You can't possibly learn a language, right? This is actually bullshit, right? The reality is you can learn at any age, right? I learned Spanish, for instance, when I was over 18, right? An adult. I'm learning German right now. Progress is very good, and I'm starting it at this age, 25. Yesterday was my birthday, so now I'm 26. All right. And I started with Chinese as well, and yeah, it's possible to learn a language very well because, for example, I started learning Spanish when I was an adult. Within 3 months, I was fluent in the language. In fact, I spoke Spanish better than I spoke some languages I had learned as a kid. So it's absolutely not true that you're too old to learn a language. Maybe you're too old even to learn pronunciation. This is bullshit. The reality is that you can pronounce any sound. You can sound the way you want, right? If you want to have like an accent, a Parisian accent, you can have a Parisian accent if you're learning Spanish. If you're learning English and you want to sound more like a British person, you can have a British accent. You can even be specific up to the accent and speak in such a way that people can't believe that you're not from that region, right? So this thing of age is not true. Like even when it comes to pronunciation, for instance, pronunciation is simple. Pronouncing the words of a language, sounding native. Pronunciation is only a function of your teeth, right? How far apart your teeth are, how open maybe your mouth is, where to place the tongue, and how to force out air from your throat, right? If you do these things correctly, if you place your teeth correctly, and you open your mouth appropriately, and you put your tongue correctly, and you push out the air correctly, of course you're gonna produce the sound, right? And this is not just stuff I'm coming up with, it's stuff that I've actually experienced for myself, right? So I didn't do much Chinese, but I learned Chinese for about a month and a half. Right. One thing I was always complimented on was my great Chinese pronunciation. Right. The natives kept complimenting me on how well I pronounced Chinese words. Right. And the reality is that Chinese was so different from any other language I had learned that most of the sounds were not familiar to me. You know, some sounds like zhong, zhong, zhong wan that come from here, and the tones were surprising to me. All this stuff. But I spent a week just learning how to pronounce them. I got an 11-year-old Chinese girl to be like. To tell me, to be able to judge whether I'm pronouncing well or not. And it was all a question of, she'd tell me, oh no, put your tongue here, your mouth is too open or whatever. And eventually I was able to produce those sounds to the point where Chinese were convinced that I'm just a natural language learner. But that's bullshit. I'm not a natural language learner. Right? I just didn't believe this myth that I'm too old and that I can only pick up the correct pronunciation as a kid. Yeah, forgive me, man. There's too much wind. It's a little noisy here. So let's move to the second language learning myth. The second language learning myth is the following. I am not naturally gifted at languages. This is BS. Right? I mean, you can already speak one language correctly, right? Your native language, and at least your native language you can speak well. Right? So if you aren't gifted at languages, then how the heck were you able to speak your own natural language? The fact that you speak a language now fluently, your native tongue, is an indication that you have within you the capacity to learn a language. this naturally gifted stuff is BS, right? We all have the capacity to learn language. It's in our nature to do it, right? So don't let yourself be held back by this kind of excuse. The third one is I cannot travel to the country. How the heck am I going to learn the language if I can't travel there? I want to learn Chinese, I should go to China. I want to learn French, but I can't travel to a French-speaking country. I want to learn English, but I can't travel to an English-speaking country. Well, this excuse might have been correct 100 years ago, or just a couple of years before we had good internet. But now it is, the internet and technology has made this invalid. For example, I am currently learning Deutsch, German, right? I mean, I'm learning German. Right now I live in Bunya. Bunya is like a village, or my parents call it a small town, all right? Not to offend them. Small town in the east of Congo, right? Now, in this town, nobody speaks German. Everybody here speaks our local languages and French. Nobody speaks German. But I'm learning German, right? And right now I'm closer to an intermediate level in German. Right? How did I get there, right? Because of the internet, right? I phoned language partners from Deutschland, from Germany, and we speak regularly every week, every day we speak, and I'm able to learn the language. So this is not an excuse. You do not need to travel to the country to learn the language. And then maybe you've heard stuff about immersion, that you need to immerse yourself in an environment in order to learn a language. Well, I don't know if you have to immerse yourself, but it's possible to immerse yourself in a language in a language and culture without living in the country, right? For instance, one of the basic things I do is I got my phone and I turned my phone into Deutsch. So my phone is now in German, okay? And then every day, instead of listening to English podcasts, I listen to Spanish podcasts. You can immerse yourself in a language easily now with technology. You could put on radio station in the language. You could just turn your computer into the language. You could only meet and speak to people in the language. You could even go further and force yourself to only think in the language. So this excuse of I can't travel is crap, right? That is no excuse to not learn the language. If it were an excuse, I wouldn't be able to speak Deutsch the way I can now. Alright? Deutsch, German. Alright, the fourth is I have terrible memory for vocabulary. Right? I just have a bad memory. So let's evaluate this. Maybe you're right. Maybe it really is indeed true that you have bad memory, right? But I have serious doubts about your bad memory. And here's why. Because you're saying you have a terrible memory for vocabulary. But the thing is, you speak your native language, and you know the vocabulary of your native language. You know thousands of words. If you had such a terrible memory for vocabulary, why is it that you know so many words in your local language? The fact that you know words in your local language is in fact an indication that you have the capacity to memorize vocabulary. So this memory excuse, I've also taken it away from you, right? You can learn this stuff. There are ways, methods and principles, right, that you can use to memorize vocabulary. And personally, I'm not even a big fan of memorizing vocabulary, but we'll talk about that kind of stuff in future videos. Right? You don't even need to spend time memorizing vocabulary, right? So what I usually use is the meaning-based approach, which just means that instead of memorizing vocabulary in a language, I just try to understand what the word means. I try to see how the word is used in a sentence. I try to pronounce it. I use the word myself in different sentences. And usually if the word is important, it will show up again, and after a while it's automatically memorized. Alright, so this idea of you have a terrible memory, please take it out. It's holding you back. And the fifth and final language learning myth is that I don't have time to learn. Christian, Modja, I would really love to learn the language, Modja, but I just don't have time. Well, this isn't true, right? Let me ask you a question. Do you have time to eat? Yes. I mean, however busy you are, you have time to eat, right? Do you have time to drink water? Sure. Do you have time to take a shit? Go to the toilet? Yes, you have time, right? Whenever something is important to you, you find the time to do it. So this is really just an excuse, right? When you find yourself saying things like you don't have time to learn the language, ask yourself how important the language is to you. Because if it's important enough, then you will make the time to learn the language. Now I've taken away your 5 most common excuses for learning a language. If you have one of these excuses, or if you have other excuses, please comment in the comment section below. I'd really like to know what your excuses are and what is holding you back from learning a language. But truly you can learn a language. And I'm not saying that out of a theory. I've done it myself several times. I am doing it right now. It's very possible. And yes, and also you don't need to take a long time to learn a language. People think that it takes years and years and years to learn a language. Not true. Within a period of 4 to 5 weeks, you can be able to communicate basic ideas in a language. Have a 30-minute, 1-hour long conversation purely in the language. I know because I've done it before and I'm doing it right now with Deutsch. Alright? Thank you very much for watching this video. And remember that I publish videos every Monday at 8 AM Central African Time. And I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye. Yep, we're done.